Monday, we went ahead and did some amazing evidence of God's design. Okay. And so what we showed is that the evidence seems to cry out things were created with a design. We also looked at tremendous evidence that the uh, so-called proofs of evolution and naturalism basically fail as long as we have the eyes that are open to see the evidence, okay? And so that's what we look at. We're able to see it. The evidence certainly cried out, created with design. Yesterday we looked at Darwin and the fossils, and we found out the fossil record, even though it's supposed to take a big bite out of the Bible, it actually supports the biblical account and takes a big bite out of the evolutionary uh, predictions of the fossil record. So basically, why we are doing these is so that young people and adults can stand firm against the evolution and the anti-God semi, rather than getting run over by it, like so many young people are. A high percentage coming from evangelical church homes are basically demolished by the naturalistic and evolutionary anti-God philosophy. And I call that run over by a semi, and because it really messes up their faith frequently. Today, we want to talk about the flood. It's a fact or is it fiction? The reason we want to include this in the crash class is because virtually every one of the students from middle school on up have taken some kind of a not only life science, but maybe even an earth science class. And by the time they get in college, they think, oh, yeah, well, geology has proven all of those millions and millions of years are a fact. And not only that, have they proven it, but it also takes a big bite out of the Christian viewpoint. So we're going to look at that right now, this afternoon. And so we hope you'll be able to stand firm against those anti-God and evolutionary ideas. One of the things to understand is we're looking at the overall thing, what Genesis 1 to 11 teaches. Genesis 1 to 2, creation, amazing design. Genesis 3 to 5, what happened to that amazing design? We got the fall and the death. And that explains why we see so much death and struggle today. That also explains why there's evil in this world. It wasn't God's fault. That's man's fault. And yesterday you look at the fossil evidence, and we thought we showed clearly that the fossil evidence gives you amazing evidence for a flood. Millions of dead things buried in the rock layers, laid down by water all over the world. Well, the fossils are a good key to that. But today, we want to look at that flood and destruction a little bit more. What about those rock layers? What about canyon formations? Can you explain that in a biblical time frame? So that's what we're going to look at. And no, the fossils don't take a bite out of the Bible, and neither does geology. So so that's what we need to do here. And we looked at other books like Evolution of the Fossils Say No. And one of the books that we were recommending was The Fossil Record. And so what we're going to do is look at that. So we're going to be looking at lots of time or lots of water. That's what geology is all about here. We can look at a rock formation or a canyon. We think it takes millions and millions and millions of years. But what happens if you have a lot of water involved? Then all of a sudden, those millions of years change, don't they? And so we're going to be looking at that. Lots of water, that's a flood. Okay. And so we have students ask us at the university, do you really believe in a flood? Yep, don't you? No. Why? How did Noah get all those stinking animals on board that little tiny boat? Well, what they do is they're suffering from the idea that this is the size of the ark, a little tiny play toy, and that's about all. All right, well, that tiny boat was not tiny. It was a great big boat, and the Bible gives us dimensions of that. And so when we look at it, it's at least 1.5 to 2 football fields in length. And so that's a monster boat, in big enough for all the animals that had to go on board that boat. You know, the flood is one of the most documented events in biblical history and in the Bible, isn't it? Um, and so we also notice that it is referred to in many chapters in the Bible. The New Testament authors accepted it. Jesus accepted it as a fact as well. So I think it's probably good enough for me to accept then. But we also see there's a lot of archaeological evidence for that flood, lots and lots of it. Sumerian king list, for instance, talks about kings who reigned long periods of time. Then a great flood came, and then afterwards, Sumerian kings ruled much shorter periods of time. Well, actually, that fits the biblical idea too. When you look at the ancient patriarchs before the flood versus after the flood, you see a huge difference. And it all started, it looks like, at the time of the flood. And otherwise, patriarchs were living in the neighborhood of 850 to 900 years. That's pretty good long spans, right? So that fits what the Sumerian king list says. The Babylonian documents also document the same flood. There's several of those, but let's just mention the Gilgamesh epic. That in the 11th tablet, there's an ark, the animals taken on board that ark, birds sent out during the flood, ark landed on a mountain, a sacrifice was offered. That sounds an awful lot like the biblical text, doesn't it? And some people say it sounds so much like the biblical text. Maybe the Bible was borrowed from the Gilgamesh epic. Well, that sounds great. They're assuming the Gilgamesh epic is the oldest writing, but I don't think that is the case. I believe Noah was actually writing it down as the flood happened. And that would put Noah's account as the oldest one around. All right. By the way, the Gilgamesh Ark has a little problem. It's shaped like a cube, and I would not want to be riding around in that on rough oceans. And I don't think you would either. There are 270 flood legends from around the world, plus, 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 and they have a boat. They have animals being saved. A good share of them do. Many of them, most all of them, have human beings being saved. So that tells me they're taking the account of the flood and now putting it into their own cultures and telling that down the road a ways. The Chinese word for boat is made up of 3 smaller picture words: 8 mouths in a vessel. How did they get that for boat? Well, Noah and his family, there were 8 individuals on board that boat, weren't there? So that seems like probably where they got that idea. And but there's a whole bunch of other characters within the Chinese language that also go right back to the book of Genesis. Like, for instance, somebody who will deceive you. There's a woman, there's a garden, and a snake in that picture. Okay, and there's deception idea. And so, yeah, they had an idea what the ancient writings of the Bible actually said. A new book came out in 2021 called Echoes of Ararat. All right. And so we're going to be stocking these here before long, but that's a collection of over 300 flood legends from various people groups from North and South America. Again, there's an ark, people being saved, animals going on board, whether it be an ark or a canoe or something like that. So very much the same theme. What does that tell me? They're all talking about the very same event. And when the Tower of Babel occurred and people groups were scattered around the world, they took that account along with them too. One of the things about Noah's account in the biblical record happens to be the thing that sets it apart from all the rest. It's the specific dates. And by the way, this is an account. It is not written as if it's a myth. How do myths or fairy tales begin? And some university professors say, you can't believe the Bible. It's just a fairy tale. So if somebody tells you that, here's what you tell them. Look at the specific dates given in the Bible relating to the flood. How does a fairy tale begin? Once upon a time, in a far distant land, such and such thing happened. Nope, this starts with year 1, month 2, day 17, the start of the flood, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month. On the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. So what are we seeing? We are seeing specific detail, not only on the dates, but also on two sources of the water. All right. Then it continues throughout the entire account in Genesis chapter 6 through 8. And you find out what happened, what day the ark grounds on the mountain, what day were the birds sent out, when was the face of the ground dry, and when was Noah told to leave. And that happened to be in the second year, second month, 27th day. So Noah was on that boat with his family for over a year. And so this is specific detail. That's why I call it Noah's ship log. And by the way, the two sources of water was not just a little rain. The windows of heaven opened. Boy, does that sound like a deluge. And not only that, the fountains of the great deep opened up. So we have water coming from above, water coming from below, and then the entire world is finally a deluge with water. No, it was not a local flood. It was worldwide. If it was just a local flood, why would you need to build a huge boat? 450 to 600 feet long. I'll bet you some of you students, your professors, your teachers would have no clue how big this boat really was. They would have no clue. They think it's a little tiny boat. But no, it's monstrous. The inclusive language of destruction in the Bible, all flesh perish from under heaven, except, of course, what's on the boat. And so why take birds on the ark if it's just a local flood? They can just fly away a little ways, right? And we read too that the waters covers the tops of the tallest mountains. Now here's some place you're going to get skeptics challenging you. They'll say, we do not have enough water right now on planet Earth to cover the tops of the tallest mountains. Well, guess what? When we look at the tops of the tallest mountains, what do you see? Layers of rock put down by water, many of which contain fossils, and that also includes the whole part of the upper part of the summit of Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world. So, what's the answer? According to Psalm 104, the mountains rose up and the valleys sank down. Boy, is that ever a good picture of what really did happen here. So the mountains weren't as tall even before the flood as they are now. So let's just go ahead and surmise what would happen if we smoothed out the earth. How much water would we have? Well, if we made the whole earth look like a soccer ball by pushing down the mountains, filling in the trenches, we'd have enough water to cover the entire world to a depth of 1.5 miles deep. That's plenty of water, right? Yeah, no problem with that. Oh, and by the way, not only do we have the waters in the ocean, but geophysicists have now discovered something that at the mantle boundary, there's a type of mineral that contains water. And that particular mineral is sweating water. And the idea is there's enough in there, right there in the upper mantle, that could flood the entire world again. And not only that, there's 3 times the amount of water that is found in the oceans contained in this particular layer. And so, and that's just under North America. So we have plenty of water. That's not an issue whatsoever. The very duration of the flood, over a year, tells us this was not a local flood. So when you look at a great big local flood, like for instance, the one that just happened in Libya, do you notice it's already the water is virtually gone? Um, and whereas the flood lasted over a year. And God said he's not going to send another flood like that again. If it was a local flood, he didn't keep his promise. And the rainbow was a signal of that promise. All right. Also, there's much geologic evidence worldwide that the flood was worldwide, and there was a flood as well. And when you look at that, there's two ways of looking at it, two major lenses. One says all of these layers were put down and the canyons were carved by a little bit of water and a lot of time, millions and millions of time, years of time. But the other model would be there was a huge amount of water and very little time. Both of them will get the job done. And the features that we see with a lot of water with a little time actually uh, fits better with the second model, not the first model. All right. So when we look at the geology, we're going to look between those two models, look at it through a different lens, a different picture, perhaps. I was taught, and I guess many students were taught, that rock layers take a lot of time to form. This is one in Southern California, by the way, um, near the Anza-Borrega Desert. And what do you see? You see these boulders. They're all water-worn boulders. That means they were rolled around by some kind of a major current. But some of those boulders, like that arrow that's pointing to the one, is about the size of a large dump truck. And guess what? How are you going to roll a boulder like that any distance at all to pile it up in a huge pile of rocks? Unless it is a very deep current and very strong and high velocity, and that fits with the flood, does not fit with slow and gradual normal processes they talk about in geology. In another spot, you see the boulder material layered like this, bigger material, little material, etc. Look at it. Some of those rocks in those layers are about the size, or at least half the size, of that Jeep. That tells me high velocity, deep currents were responsible for these. Okay, Anza-Borrega Desert here. Here's a spot where you see this black material. That's a water-worn boulder conglomerate, or like a natural cement. But what it's doing is forcing its way into the layers on your right, like a fist into a layer cake. Well, if the layer cake's been in the oven for very long, you can't get your fist in it. It's solid rock, isn't it? And according to standard geology, the rock on your right is a type of sandstone, and the chemistry of that would tell you it would only take a few hundreds of years, likely, to turn it into solid rock. So the advent of the material coming from your left into the right will tell you that those layers could not have been millions of years long. Otherwise, that would have been solid rock, and you would not have been able to push the layers up in one way and down in another. So this again indicates catastrophic flooding possibilities in a very short period of time. Otherwise, you can't have a scenario like that. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980 and gave us a lot of knowledge. It was a gorgeous spot to go vacation before that. Then the mountain took up a bad habit of smoking. It's not good when a mountain begins to smoke. Then it began to bulge, and the big eruption came in May 18th, 1980, when all of a sudden that mountain came to life, and we lost about 1/3 of the mountain that day, part of it in a huge landslide, others just because of the volcano. And now we lost a lot of mountain, but we also gained a lot of knowledge about layer formations. We've also found out canyons don't take long to form. Okay, well, here is a example of some of the layers that you see that had formed, some of which were in just one day at Mount St. Helens. And you say, wait a minute, I've been taught that it takes millions of years to make those fine little layers. Nope, nope, not at all. It turns out that it can happen in a very, very short period of time. You also have the Badlands National Park in North Dakota, where they'll tell you those layers took millions of years to form. Now, what happens if you ask them, well, wait a minute, didn't we see the same thing happen at Mount St. Helens in one day? He said, well, that Mount St. Helens was a special case. And well, maybe this was a special case as well. All right, we just don't know that, do we? We weren't there to watch it. But they'll also tell you badland topography, like you see this type of erosion, can't happen quickly. Well, I say it can happen quickly. And in fact, at Mount St. Helens, there were secondary steam blasts that produced steam pits that were monstrous. How long did they take? Half a day, and that's about all. If it's the conditions that are important, not the actual time that's needed. Okay, I said canyons were formed very rapidly too. This one goes for 8 miles back there. By the way, that canyon is not on the map prior to 1980, but it is there now. And basically, when we look at that and we say, wow, one day mostly, and that whole canyon was formed. National Geographic even says it similar to that. You would expect a hard rock canyon to be thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years old, says Peter Frenson, monument scientist. But this was cut in less than 10 years, less than a decade. Notice that he said that through hard rock. Doesn't take long to make a canyon given the right conditions. And the conditions of the flood would certainly do it, wouldn't they? All right. And so what about the flooding situation? You would have the whole world covered by water, nothing to stop the waves, giant tsunamis all over. Guess what? That's going to take canyon formation and the picture of time out of it. You're going to now get millions and millions of times the amount of erosion pattern going on here. Okay, now we also have Bryce Canyon National Park in Utah. And what do we see there? Petrified mud. Yeah, here's a principle of geology for you. When you see mud, think flood. When you see a lot of mud, think big flood. All right. And so that's what we're seeing here. And then there's the Colorado National Monument. I just happen to live right down below that little canyon a little ways. And you say, wow, that's a beautiful place to live. Yep, come. Take a tour with us of the Colorado National Monument. And we'd love to take you there if you wanted to come. And but we get evidence for the quick erosion of that and also the layers that being put down quite rapidly. And so this is a good evidence of the flood. I see petrified mud, I think major flood. All right. And then if you look closer at all these formations, yeah, even the sandstone is probably put down by water in a catastrophic event. Here's another canyon on the Colorado National Monument. You see a canyon, big one, looks like a lot of water cut through there, but look at that little V, a canyon within a canyon. So that tells me the bigger part of the canyon carved out fairly rapidly, and then when this channel of water kind of calmed down, we have the inner canyon formed as well. All right. Anyhow, in eastern Washington, we do see much evidence of a huge flood. And this is at Dry Falls, east of or west of Spokane, Oregon. But that is associated with Missoula Montana. And this is why it's going to be called the Missoula Flood. And you look at the shorelines of the Missoula Flood, where the M is, that's what the water depth was. Almost 1,000 feet higher than the city of Missoula right now. And then when you look downstream, you find out there was probably a glacial ice dam that blocked that section of the Columbia River and then formed a huge lake behind it that held almost 500 cubic miles of water. And then that water would have backed up, making a huge, huge, huge lake over there. And then it broke through the ice, according to standard geology today, taking with it another dam on the Spokane Lake. It's actually Glacial Lake Columbia is what it was called. And all of it then went downstream, carved out huge canyons in a matter of a few hours and days. That's all it took. And so when we look at this, we see evidence of major flooding. All right, here's the size of that lake. There's where the ice dam would be. And you see the stuff on the left of what's called ice dam? That's all the erosion that occurred right down the Columbia Gorge and ending up at the Pacific Ocean. And that map, by the way, you can find in that book, Global Flood. Okay, a very, very good resource for everybody. But now we think that was a huge flood. Yes, it was. Now we just saw a huge flood. We didn't watch it, but we've been seeing the news that occurred in Libya, and where you now have maybe almost 7,000 people have perished. Big, big flood. But you realize this is a little tiny flood in Libya compared to what this flood would have been. In fact, I did some calculations on that last night, and I found out that the Missoula flood that I'm showing you pictures of would have been 70,000 times bigger or more water than the Libyan flood. And so we see what kind of catastrophic damage can be done in there. So there'd be Missoula, Montana. You see the shorelines there. Now just imagine this huge, huge lake in that entire region suddenly bursting through, and we can't even draw a picture that would really show what it would look like, even hundreds of miles away from the collapsed dam. But there's something, it's flat as a pancake across there right now, except for these canyons. But you can imagine the wall of water coming through there at one time, forming canyons like this in 24 to 48 hours. Whoa, wait a minute. And this particular canyon goes for approximately 22 miles, the Soap City, Washington, 6 miles wide, up to 900 feet deep. 1 to 2 days is all it took, according to standard geology today. There's another spot from the same flood called Palouse Falls. Now we look at that and say, that's a big waterfall, 180 feet tall. That's a big one. But when you look at the rolling hills on the other side, you find out water was washing even over the horizon. And so that's also indicated by the big plunge pool where the water comes into the river below. And so we're looking at that and saying, ooh, a lot more water was coming through there at one time. And in fact, a huge amount. And then that particular amount of water, just like the rest of the Missoula flood, carved this big canyon that goes to the Snake River. And then this was formed in 24 to 48 hours. And that is standard geology. And down below, you see huge piles of volcanic and granite boulders. That one right there was rolled around. It's about the size of a house. Just to the very bottom left of the picture, you see another big boulder of granite. Again, water-worn, big boulders, major flooding. You go to Escalante, Utah, and right on top of the cliffs, you see, wait a minute, hold on. Look at those big boulders. Whoa, Water-worn boulders carried those in. And like I say, it's on top of the canyon. There's a canyon on the right, canyon on the left. And so there's a huge water cascade that went through here, and I believe quickly carving out that particular, uh, those particular canyons. Now let's look at another one, boulders. You go to Twin Falls, Idaho, and you see boulders out there that are all water worn, and it looks like a big potato patch, except those potatoes are pretty good size. And they're all water worn. That means the depth of the water was very great and the velocity very high. And that would be at the collapse of another flood. And that would have been Lake Bonneville. Lake Bonneville, you can see the shorelines of the ancient Lake Bonneville just outside of Salt Lake City. And it goes for 300 miles. You can see the shoreline. And that means that lake would have been about 900 to 1,000 feet higher than the present huge Great Salt Lake. And then it catastrophically flooded, and that big lake covering 1/3 the state of Utah was suddenly released downstream. The result, Snake River Canyon. And according to standard geology right now, that canyon wasn't there 30 days before this event. And again, look at the huge plunge pool, but the smaller amount of water going into it. And then those boulders that I was showing you about the size of the automobile, those are on top of the canyon, indicating what? The depth of the water was many, many, many feet above that canyon at one time, maybe a 200, up to 200 feet over the top of that. Dury, who's a geomorphologist, has studied world's rivers and streams. His conclusion is 95% of all the rivers and streams in the world are underfit, means they cannot be explained by today's water flow. They need some more bigger and sometimes catastrophic water flow. You go to Siberia, you find the same thing, even bigger than the Missoula flood. All right, much, much bigger than the Missoula flood, and whole mountain ridges and canyons left as a result of that particular flood. And that is in Siberia. Wave Rock in Australia. This goes for 7 miles. You can imagine the water rolling off of that at one time. Today, it's bone dry. So that means the earth is kind of drying out. That's what it seems like. But it turns out that the time, those millions of years, will not be the hero of the plot. It's the conditions. A lot of water in a short period of time can get a lot of things accomplished that time will not do on its own. Well, was Darwin wrong when he took that voyage on the Beagle and saw and made certain judgments? Well, yeah. He looked at the volcanic deposits along the coast of South America and said, oh, it takes eons of time to make layers like that. Well, he was wrong there, because we saw that those layers can happen in one day. That's all it takes. And then he was wrong. They went down took a little boat from the Beagle on up the Santa Cruz River there. And what did he notice? He noticed this river, and he noticed the cliff in the background. And he said, oh, it must have taken eons of time for this Argentinian river to be able to carve through that bluff. Turns out he missed some very important clues, like the boulders. There's all kinds of huge boulders downstream, and not only downstream, but even at the top of that bluff of basalt, automobile-sized boulders. And so that would indicate there was a big collapse of a lake upstream that carved through that bluff in a very short period of time, and perhaps hours or days. All right, that's in Argentina. Again, remember that canyon within a canyon? We can look at in Colorado, we can go over to Utah, see more evidence for that flood. Like, for instance, this is Canyonlands, the Green River Overlook. And look at that. We're 18 miles from where we are standing to the other side of this whole canyon. That's a lot of erosion. And we can just imagine the water just washing through that in a very short period of time by the collapse of some kind of a lake upstream. Where did all that water go? Went right down through the Grand Canyon eventually after it's carved out a lot of the canyonlands. And so I see a different picture when I look at the Grand Canyon. I see evidence of a flood. For the erosion of the Grand Canyon, the standard interpretation is that it was millions of years of gradual erosion. But what did we notice with Missoula flood and Bonneville flood, and some of these other ones? We found out that time is not the hero of the plot. You can get the same thing done in a very short period of time with a lot of water. And we surmise there are two ways to get a huge amount of water. One is from the flood. And when we read in the Bible, we find out the waters washed off the continents. All right. The mountains rose up, the valleys sank down. There'd be huge amounts of flood water coming down, starting the erosion. And then in some places where the river is blocked, you get these great big inland seas as well. And then all of a sudden, these seas became become overtopped, and all that water cascades down and forms canyons. I was just at a conference and we're talking about seeing the shorelines around this lake right here, which would be called Hopi Lake. All right. And then somehow it broke through the Kaibab upwarp. Usually water goes around a mountain. This one goes right through the mountain, carves out the Grand Canyon, and then below the Grand Canyon is that big pile of boulders, some of which were the size of the dump truck. Remember that? Ah, I believe it's a smoking gun. Probably they were deposited after this was washed out by a catastrophic flow, in which case the entire Grand Canyon could have been carved possibly in weeks, not over millions of years. Remember, time is not the hero of the plot, it's conditions. Let's go to a place just south of Grand Junction where we live. You see what's called Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Another nice place for us to take you if you want to go. Black Canyon of the Gunnison. If you were to take a flying jump from, say, this point right here in the road, go all the way down to the river, that would be 1,600 feet straight down. That's amazing, isn't it? Very big jump. But when you look at that, did that little river down below carve this big canyon? And I say, no, it would not have carved that big canyon. In fact, this looks like a big tear fault where the earth just kind of cracked as a result of a huge earthquake, in which case you're talking about minutes to basically form the most of the canyon and then washed out afterwards. And so you're looking at something that catastrophically can form in just a short period of time. Go to Sierra Nevada mountains in California. And as you look across it, beautiful scenery. And we have a lot of volcanic basalt right in front of us. But take a look. Keep eyes open. And what do you see across here? You see what looks like a water channel? Let's look a little closer at that. It looks like there might have been a huge amount of water going through there. So let's climb down at this cliff and find out what we actually see. And all we see is a little bit of water today, but look at the rocks below. Look at those huge rocks. Look at all this sculpted basalt. What does that tell you? There was a lot more water through there at one time, a huge amount. And that fits with catastrophic flow, Sierra Nevada mountains. You know, when you get that amount of water flowing, you have to understand one thing. It's not just water. It's not just sand and rocks. It's a conglomerate of material, like a cement slurry going downstream at 65, 70 miles per hour. And it's mixed with all kinds of chemicals. And when it hits a stopping point, you get a cement dump. And that's what we see at Death Valley, California, which happens to be one of the lowest, or is the lowest point in continental USA. And when we look at closer, you find out that the cement slurry that carved out the canyons actually coated the canyon as it was going through. And so you see the coating. Now in the distance, you see part of the cement dump. And so this fits with this catastrophic lake dam breaking. That's what we see. And so I see evidence of the flood for catastrophic drainages of that. I see catastrophic evidence for putting down those layers as well. Major amount of layers being put down, and besides the erosion. And you say, wait a minute, haven't they proven that those layers are millions of years old and put down over multiple millions of years? Hasn't that been proven by radioactive decay method? And so when you hear a professor tell you that these methods of radioactive decay dating are very accurate, you might ask the question, at least in your mind, or maybe even in class, how do you know they're accurate? We're always using those methods to date something of unknown age. How do you know your assumptions are correct? All this kind of stuff. The only way to know if these methods are really accurate is to date something of known age and see how you stack up. And that was done. Remember Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. Since that time, a recent volcanic dome built up within the crater of Mount St. Helens. They decided to date that dome. Guess what kind of dates they got? 340,000 years minimum to 2.8 million years. Hey, wait a minute. Something's wrong. They should have gotten 30 years, shouldn't they have? But they didn't. Something's definitely wrong here. You go to New Zealand, you see exactly the same thing. Not quite the same number of millions of years, but similar. In Hawaii, there's a lava flow that when it cooled, they were actually able to date it, and they knew when it occurred about 100 years ago. And it turned out that the dates they got on that lava flow was 3 million minimum to 1 billion years. I say something's wrong with that. And so if go to the Grand Canyon, there's a recent volcanic lava flow, flowed down into the canyon at one time, actually blocked a river. They decided to date the lava there, and they ended up with dates at least as old and up to twice as old as the rock layers underneath the canyon by what they consider the most accurate of all those dating methods. They're not that accurate. Something's wrong. So if you ask the ranger about it, they'll say you can't be right. Well, give them the data, and they may agree. Okay, something's wrong. But my question is this: if rocks of known age don't give you accurate radioisotope dating, how do you rely on the very same methods to give you accurate results on unknown aged rocks? You have a problem there, don't you? Okay, we see evidence of the flood. We see evidence of mass burial. Look at those clams. They're all whole. When a clam dies, the shell's open. This tells you have millions of clams being buried very rapidly to the point they can't dig their way out. And that's what whole clams would tell you, like those found near Texas along the Biloxi River area. Okay. And again, mass burial, evidence of a flood, and a spot in the Grand Canyon. And these nautolite fossils, we believe a squid-like creature actually lived in those particular shells and what's now a fossil. And there are millions of them. And they're all oriented the same direction. What does that indicate? Mass burial by some kind of a water flow in going one direction. Okay. A great book for you if you want to go to the Grand Canyon and I'm not available to go with you, is get this book, Your Guide to the Grand Canyon. Or maybe one of our other staff can go with you as well. And so, what a wonderful book for you. And you go up to Fossil Butte National Monument up in Wyoming, and you find this particular slab on their entrance as you come in, and you find out it's a mass burial of fossil fish. Notice you can recognize them still as fish and recognize the species, by the way, and not a fin out of place. And that little fish like that guy, and then these bigger ones like this one right here, and or a 2 foot long one that sometimes you find. This one is a 10 foot palm frond, and it has fish buried right along with it. And so, how did that happen? Notice there's no decay going on. If there were millions of years, if it was slow and gradual processes of burying it, they would have decayed. But this means rapid burial. How rapid? Well, this guy's eating his lunch when both of them got trapped. And so that's evidence of catastrophic burial, good evidence of the flood. Mass burial again. Many different types of dinosaurs ripped apart and found now in the rocks at Dinosaur National Park, all jumbled together. That indicates a major flood, because a little flood is not going to tear apart a 70-ton dinosaur. Rapid burial indicates what? Flooding. Now, when you look at the layers, I hate to say it, when I look at geologic layers, I get hungry. I think of a stack of pancakes. Each layer being a pancake, and I think about some of them containing blueberries, some pecans, syrup over the top of all that, and butter on top of that. I think about that, and I get hungry. But what would you do if you were looking at these layers as the rocks are, and you find one petrified tree cutting through all of those pancakes, all of those layers? You'd say, those layers can't be millions of years old, because that tree would have rotted. But then you look for further clues. Notice how the petrified tree doesn't have roots. Trees don't do well without roots. It looks like this was ripped up and deposited very rapidly in some kind of a sedimentary catastrophe and buried that way. That fits with the flood, doesn't it? Well, where do you see that? You see polystrate trees, or trees going through many layers in many parts of the world. And this is in eastern United States. And you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a whole bunch of those petrified trees going through many pancakes. Again, that indicates those layers all had to be put down very rapidly. You also notice there's no roots underneath those petrified trees like that guy. All right, another look at that right there. No, again, ripped up and deposited. So polystrate fossils are found in many parts of the world, all over the world, in fact. And so that indicates a lot of water in a very short period of time. And that fits with a flood. Okay, now think about this one. At Kodachrome Base in the United States, you see the bottom pancake poking its way up through what is supposedly over 30 million years of history. Well, first of all, the 30 million years could not possibly exist, because those layers would have been solid rock, and that could never have happened. And the bottom layer would not have stayed fluid or even been able to fluidize and be able to poke up its way through it. And so, no, those 30 million years never existed. But you notice something else about this. You notice these things sticking up here? That's one of those pipes that you see right there at the top. As we dig down, we see what these layers look like. Here's another one right here. There are 165 of these particular structures at Kodachrome State Park in Utah. Wonderful place to go visit. Again, it indicates those layers can't be millions and millions of years old. It looks like everything was going on in one major catastrophic flood with a lot of hydraulic activity happening. Push in here, something pokes up over here. And a Kodachrome basin, 165 of those fingers poked up through there because all that sediment was still yet soft. So we're looking at a worldwide flood. And with that, calculations would show that you would have currents 150 miles per hour and 1,000 feet deep. That means any mountain would have been washed to powder in a very, very short period of time. And it's not going to take millions of years to even erode a mountain. All right. We see what one of the mountains that got eroded. It's called it's at the Pikes Peak Granite. And it seems like the granite got plain there near Colorado Springs. And then there was sandstone put on top of it during the flood. Now, this particular knife edge between the granite and the sandstone is called the Great Unconformity. And by the way, that's a worldwide Great Unconformity. And what's also interesting is this particular formation right above Bill's head there. And what it is sandstone. They've got a name for it at Colorado Springs called the Sagwash sandstone. But you find it in other places with different names as well. And one big one is the Tahpeet sandstone in the bottom of the Grand Canyon, just above the inner gorge of the same type of Precambrian material. And there you see evidence of catastrophic flow. And but the Tahpeet sandstone doesn't stop at the Grand Canyon or even near Colorado Springs. Everything in white in that picture is Tahpeet sandstone. Goes clear across the United States, goes down into Mexico and north of Greenland. It covers the top of Moran Peak in the Grand Tetons. And so what are we looking at? Some major evidence of a continental-wide flood that fits with the global flood process very nicely. We also find massive limestones, same pancake with different names, but it's the same layer, same pancake board. One of my favorite one is the Niobrara Formation. You find it at the Glen Eyrie in Colorado, and it covers much of the USA. And you find it in England, White Cliffs of Dover, Israel, Spain. Now they're even thinking Australia. Niobrara Formation. Okay, that is a monster pancake indicating a worldwide flood. So one of the most documented biblical events is supported by much archaeological evidence and much geologic evidence as well, all over the world. And so Noah's flood is a fact, fiction, reality? I say it's reality. It tells me that you can trust the Bible from Genesis 1:1 all the way through the rest of the Bible. Why? Because Genesis 6-8 in the Bible, the flood chapters, are some of the most contested chapters in the entire Bible. And if those turn out to be true, then we ought to believe the rest of them as well. Okay? We also see God's grace. I don't want to just talk about the flood. I love to talk a little bit about God's grace real quickly. Even a lot of people think grace, that's a New Testament thing. No, we actually find it in the flood. And we find out that, and when you read chapter 6-8, you find Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Wow. Or grace. The ark was given for protection for those who believe and animals. God's grace. God allows his wife and his daughters-in-law and sons to go on board. How would you feel if your daughter or son couldn't go? And God is present with Noah. What does he say? He doesn't say, go into the ark, Noah. He says, come into the ark. What's that indicate? God is there with him. All right. God closed the door of the ark, not Noah. Why? Well, probably too heavy for Noah to close. But at the same time, when you look at it, God's grace, he didn't want Noah to think. He just shut out all of these people. And so that's God's grace. And God remembers Noah, according to the scripture in there, and wasn't going, oh, Noah, I forgot all about that guy. I wonder how he is. It was a constant remembering, a constant watchful care is what this represents. And so we see that as evidence of God's grace. And then God's grace, finally, in the sign of the rainbow. Yeah, he knew man's hearts, didn't he? And he knew our propensity toward wickedness and to evil. But he said, I'm not going to send another flood like that again. And that's a good promise of God. And then again, that means that there was a global flood, not a local one. So, flood, fact or fiction? I believe it was reality, fact. And so that's what we just finished doing today. We hope this is going to help you stand firm against many of the evolution and anti God philosophies brought to you by naturalism and the naturalism semi. And basically, that has destroyed the faith of an awful lot of young people. And we're hoping that you now can stand firm and reach others all around you with the truth. And please do so. We're hoping you can. All right. Keep in mind there are other things you have available, and these are going to be available on replay here not too awful long from now. And we have Costa Rica tours coming up in March, and we're hoping you can come. Yellowstone tour in June and August next summer. All right. And so this Discover Creation tour will help you not only discover creation, but worship your creator, February 25 to March 5. Okay. So if you want to know about any of these tours, email me, Dave Nutting at discovercreation.org. Be glad to answer any questions you have and etc. Couple of good books for you today on this topic, the global flood. Unlocking Earth's Geologic History, Dr. John Morris. Another one is by Jeff Miller, Dr. Miller, Flooded. That's a graphic picture, but oh my, a lot of the pictures I use in the presentation that are now well used in different areas. A lot of them I took myself, but some of these pictures are in that flood book, Flooded too, and the global flood. So remember that one, the guidebook. There's also a guidebook to Yellowstone National Park. You can also pick up our set of DVDs, special price, $35, 12 sessions, including a 75-page study guide that you can use in Sunday schools, youth groups, lots of different places. Okay, yesterday I mentioned the fossil record, how the fossils support the flood as well. Okay, so we're hoping you can discover creation and worship that creator and see when you go out on some of these tours, see immense beauty, even in the Southwest United States. You see thorns and thistles, evidence of the fall, right? But look at that. God brings great beauty out of destruction. We look at the rock layers around us here or at the Grand Canyon and we see beauty there. Well, we have to understand that's a destroyed world. But God makes beauty out of destruction. So let's not forget that, okay? And his amazing artwork all over the world. Yeah, you can see destruction, but we see God's hand at work through it as well. Okay? So discover creation, worship your creator. Okay, I'm going to stop the program right now and let's see if there are some questions that I might be able to answer for you.
So I had a question about when you were talking about uh, the depth of the water, the water that we have now. If the land surface was flattened out, it would cover the the whole Earth to a depth of, you said, a mile or so. So my question kind of is and I know that you referred to the passage about the mountains rose up, the valleys sank down. So before the flood, what would have been the topography? Like, does that include the ocean basins? Were there ocean basins before the flood? Do we know? Um, and I was kind of reading um, last night about uh, plate tectonics. I went out to Oregon and the Pacific Northwest, got to see Mount St. Helens this summer, and so I purchased, actually at Mount St. Helens, I purchased the Audubon field guide to the Pacific Northwest states, and so I'm kind of reading through that about different things. One of them being the geography, the geology of the Northwest, and so they're talking about the plate that's underneath, that's subducting off the coast of Washington and Oregon, and how they think it's left over from a bigger plate that used to be out in the Pacific Ocean, but now, before the continents broke up. Anyway, I'm kind of just wondering, what was all that like before the flood, as far as the ocean basins, the plates, and how would that affect, I guess, the water, um, how much water was available?
So usually when we have a hard question, I turn it over to Mary Jo. But but this one is in geology, so I'll take a stab at it. Basically, we really would think there may have been some amount of tectonics going on prior to the flood. The reason for that is because that kind of activity will help keep the ocean basins, etc., from stagnating. Okay? And so there would be probably some kind of motion like that. So there will be some kind of topography going on. The topography was greatly changed with the advent of major tectonic activity that we call, and was nicknamed that by geophysicist Dr. John Baumgartner, called runaway subduction. And
Hmm.
that is what happens if the subduction doesn't creep along, but all of a sudden it picks up a little bit of speed, causing more heat, less frictional drag, and it goes faster and faster and faster until the entire seafloor is subducted underneath the continental uh,
Hmm.
crust. And that is a model for the flood. If you want to read about that a little bit more from an easy to understand perspective, go to our website at discovercreation.org and put in the search function subduction, okay, or runaway. Either one of those two words or both of those words will take you to an article that I wrote in there and shows you a picture of it as well. We also don't think that the topography was as great before the flood as it is right now. And now I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I can't say for sure. And nobody can really say that, except for we hear that mountains rose up, the valley sank down, appears like at the tail end of the flood when I read Psalm 104. But yeah, I think the topography wasn't as pronounced as it is today.
Hmm.
Mhm. Yes, and you can still have a subduction, so you can still see the variation, and possibly. But like we said, those are models,
Hmm.
and you don't know for sure. Okay. Glad you're asking, Joe.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? And by the way, if you have a question, feel free to email me, Dave Nutting at discovercreation.org. And if I can't answer it, I'll give it to Mary Jo and or maybe Gail, our secretary behind the desk.
We'll give it to Brian.
Oh, I'll give it to Brian. Brian, do this research. Okay. Yep. That's what younger staff are for, right, Mary Jo?
Yeah,
Answer
right.
those hard questions. All right. All right. Well, I think we're glad that you were able to join us for this short crash class. As Mary Jo said at the very beginning, it's not going to answer all the questions, but hopefully equip you with enough and that you'll come to realize, oh, there are answers to these things these professors, these teachers are bringing up. And if they throw something at you, you have no clue how to answer it, talk to us. Okay?
That's right. And yeah, thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for watch your email. We'll be sending out some more announcements of further online things or on in-person things. So we'd like to have you join us. If you'd like to have a seminar in your hometown or church or something, send us an email and we'll see if we or somebody else on our staff might be available to do that. Or we can do a video presentation for your whole group if you would like to do that. We just did that Tuesday night with a church in Nebraska. And we can do that for other places that saves us a lot of travel time and saves the church some money in paying expenses coming there and so on. So if you wanted to arrange something like that for a homeschool group or a church or whatever, your group, a home study group or whatever, please get a hold of us.
I want to thank you very, very much for this program. I enjoyed all 3 days, but I have to say that my most favorite topic is flood geology. And I couldn't wait for today. It did not disappoint. Thank you.
Oh, good. All right.
I like this one best too. I just feel there's so much power in it.
Yeah, it to me is the most obvious for creation when you just look at the earth and the scars on the earth and I don't understand how you could be a denier of it when the evidence is right there before your eyes.
That's because you're willing to open your eyes and look.
Do you have a moment for a quick story?
Right after I tell you one thing, we see
What?
so many people that says, I don't see evidence for the flood as they close
Exactly.
their eyes.
Or I don't know what you're talking about.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Go ahead, a quick story. I'd love to hear it.
Very quick, and I may have told you this, if I have, excuse me, but when I grew up in Massachusetts and we went to the ocean every summer and I spent all of my days down on the beach.
Nice.
And I watched the tides come in and the tides go out and saw when the tides went out, the formations that the sand made and everything, as the water was receding. And then one time, the first time I flew over the United States, I think I had gotten just past the Mississippi River and I looked out the window and there was the same formation as I saw from the quick receding in the mud at the beach.
Yeah.
And it was just so evident that there was just a lot of water that just, went away.
We had actually thought about that would be really neat to get some kind of a National Science Foundation grant to be able to go to beaches around the world and to look at those formations and then go ahead and not only look at those formations, but compare those with canyons all over the world.
I love the Lord and I love that he's coming back and the New Jerusalem and all that. But did you guys read the part where there's not going to be any oceans?
I read that. Now,
Like, why would he do that?
for a
We
beach
got all
lover,
this water, it wouldn't be in our way, you know.
one
Now,
of
I
the
have heard an alternative to that, a way of understanding that, and I'm not vouching for it, but I'll just throw it out and you can consider it, is a friend of ours who was studying the book of Revelation and knew the Old Testament very well. And they used to call that big bronze laver in
Yeah.
the temple the sea. And he got to thinking one day, maybe that sea that they're talking about, there won't be any sea, might mean because we don't need that cleansing fountain anymore, because we will all be totally cleansed, be with the Lord, and, you know, be holy with him.
I like that.
I thought when he said that, and this was years ago that he said that, and I've never forgotten it, because I went, I like the seashore too, Deborah. I like the oceans. Well, who knows? But I also know that if there are no seas in the new heavens and the new earth, the oceans, he's got something a whole lot better for us.
yeah, exactly.
Eye has not seen, ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man.
That's
Yep.
right.
As prepared. Amen.